Now we have to sit here and look formal and all like straight faced because it's all being recorded at this point. No more of that frivolity.
No frivolity. And will we see the other people? Okay.
You can see them if you open up the view in the upper right-hand corner and include the gallery. And then we can, but for the first 25 minutes, we'll keep them on mute and then let them in a little bit later. All right, I'm letting people in.
Right. Sarah.
Hello, all. You are all on mute for the time being. As you enter the Zoom, Diana and I will talk for a little while, and then we will let you all in about 20 minutes or so. Although if you have something pressing, please feel free to raise your hand or raise the button on your Zoom interface and let me know. Anyway, it's a pleasure to have you all here. My name, for those who don't know, is George Slade, and I'm the host of Photobook Banter. My guest this evening, Diana Matar, she and I are both born in the 60s. I hadn't realized that, Diana, but we are children of the 60s. And whatever that means, I'm pleased to be able to welcome Diana. Diana was born in California, and would you say that you expatriated at a certain point in your 30s?
No, I left actually much earlier. I was working in Latin America in my early 20s and kind of going back and forth, or late teens, early 20s, and going back and forth to study in San Francisco and then working for Associated Press at first and then freelancing mainly in Mexico, but in Panama and Nicaragua and El Salvador. And so
you mentioned that your photographic education came primarily during your time in Mexico City. So you didn't start by learning about American photographers.
no, I learned some of the photojournalists and, kind of the Magnum school and that. But in terms of photography as a wider field, I was really, I really came of age, I would say, in Mexico and Latin America. And, Graciela Iturbide, Alvarez Bravo, Eniac Martinez, the Pablo Montessorio, these were the people that, as I was really kind of starting to work, were really influencing me, and less photojournalists than I would say documentary photographers or art photographers. Yeah.
Mariana Yampolsky, was she part of
Mariana Yampolsky, yes, absolutely. Yes.
Cristina Rodero, or she's Spanish?
Cristina Rodero, she's Spanish, but she worked in Mexico, but she's Spanish, yeah.
Yeah, some wonderful artists.
Yeah.
We'll hold off on the two surprise influences, or they were surprising when I learned of them, your American influences, once we start talking about the landscape a little bit.
Okay.
But I would love to start by talking about your books, and in particular your first book, Evidence, which was published a good time ago now, 2014.
2014, yeah. Yeah, 2015 in America and late 2014 in Europe.
Yeah. I want to pull up the book. I have it on a PDF version, and we'll take a look at that. But if you want to just give people a quick notion of what Evidence was about and how it entered your your life, that would be great.
Yeah, I started on working on evidence of several years, quite a few years before. I think this is yeah, there we go. Before it was published, obviously, I worked on it for about 6 years, and my father-in-law was a Libyan dissident, and he was kidnapped and imprisoned by the Gaddafi regime. And he was taken from Egypt and then taken to Libya and never seen by the family again. And in the beginning, evidence was really three different projects. Before we were able to go to Libya, before Gaddafi was killed, I was working mainly in Egypt and sites there where it was thought people had been imprisoned or taken, or these secret kind of jails. And I was really looking for a language that would attend to this idea of disappearance, what happens to a family, what happens to the intimate relationships within a family when somebody goes missing. And then I also worked in Italy, where quite a few Libyan dissidents had been killed by the Gaddafi regime. And I photographed trees and kind of as the last witness to the people and the place where these horrific acts happened. And then during the Arab Spring, when the after Gaddafi was killed and there was a change of regime, we were able to go to Libya. And that's where I really started working in earnest on this work and worked with Libyan human rights groups and family members and going to buildings and fields and places where people had been imprisoned underground, imprisoned in the buildings.
That's when we were talking the other day about a facility that was underground. I was referring to that prison that you can barely see unless you're almost on top of it, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You have to walk up to a ledge to be able to see it. And most of these places don't exist anymore. They've been bulldozed and taken down and rebuilt. And
As
um,
as I was doing my reading and looking back on some things, including a book review of evidence, I realized that you never met the man you were talking about.
exactly. Yes, I never met my father-in-law, but his presence was so um well, it was so present within the family and the lore. It was really, really present. I met my husband um about 6 years, 5.5 years after he had been kidnapped.
Mhm.
So um
And you were abroad for then 17 years. That's the number that sticks in my head.
I was what?
Abroad, you were you out of
Um
the United States for 17 years.
um Yeah, well, that's in relation to My America. Before I started My America, I had been away. But in terms of evidence, I had these three bodies of work that were all looking at disappearance and imprisonment and state enforced violence. And I wasn't sure of how to put them together. And a friend of mine, an editor actually, a writing editor, she said, did you keep diaries during these times? And I said, yes, absolutely. And she said, why don't you go back and look at those and see if you might find a narrative and bring that through? And that's what um, really brought the work of evidence together. I can read this one if you keep that up there, George. This is in June 2010 in London. It has been months. Saif al-Islam has given us no news about Jabala. Jabala is my father-in-law. and Saif al-Islam was Gaddafi's son. He says he will release the file only if Hisham agrees to be interviewed by an Egyptian newspaper. Hisham refuses. The journalist is on the payroll of the Libyan regime. So I used these excerpts from things I had written throughout this time when we were followed, my husband was followed. We couldn't really speak openly about any of these things. But after the revolution and after Gaddafi was killed, of course we could. So that is the thread that goes throughout the book is the pictures are about sites where these horrific things happened to many people all over the country, but the text is that goes through is really a very personal text about what was going on in the family and how it affected us personally. And then
So many of these themes are themes that will be followed up in My America. Um, and I believe it's, we'll look at My America in just a moment. I just wanted to take a quick look at evidence and just to give people an idea of how this book was put together. So very spare in a way, but also sort of irregular, I guess I would say. The sort of an irregular rhythm to the pages. You and your editor, did you have a particular strategy going into this?
well, I actually designed the book before I met my publisher, and he
Ah,
really wanted to keep the design. I wanted a lot of white space because as you go through the book and you see the pictures and you read the text, it's a very heavy story. And I wanted this kind of space that you can kind of sit with the information so it's not too overwhelming.
mhm.
So that's yeah, there are reasons the way each thing is put there. There is an irregularity, I guess, especially when you're looking at it like this with 4 pages up, it looks much more irregular than if you're turning the pages.
True, true. It's kind of unfair. But I remember looking at evidence and feeling that sense of moving from color to black and white and through nighttime landscapes and the lighting changing as we went along and then the texts, that interspersed. There's the sense of a sense of being off balance all the way through it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's purposeful. Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets at that.
Um, yeah. You all right if we switch over to the newer book?
Sure. Yes.
Let's go to My America. My America was published in 2024, but the photographs in it were made in 2015 and 2016, right?
2015, 2016, 17, and 18. I was
Oh,
researching in 2015, and then I started photographing 2016, 17, and 18. Yeah.
just a quick comparison. Well, let's hold off on the comparison of the page approach. But this is a story with a lot of text and also a lot of insight into it's interesting as I think about this book. I've always been careful about talking about it. I've always felt very much like I have to tread carefully in terms of how to describe the central events in the book. And I know it in part that's because you spent a lot of time having to go through legal channels. And you were very careful as we talked about describing situations and it stuck with me that this was material that needed to be handled very, very carefully.
Yeah. I don't know if if everyone's familiar with what the book's about, I should probably speak a little bit about that, or you can speak about it.
Oh, I'll let you speak about it.
Okay, it's a book in which I am photographing at sites where people died in a lethal police encounter. And there are 110 of these in the book. And I photographed in 4 states, in California and New Mexico and Texas and Oklahoma. I photographed at 300, about over 300 places, and we used 110 in the book. And then when I finished the photography, I started researching what happened after the fact. So how these different incidences went through the courts, whether any of the officers were taken to court, any more information that came out about the incident itself. So these things usually take quite a while to become public, either through district attorney's reports, police reports, and then to the legal channels, and anything that was publicly released by the families that differed from the official accounts. And so I was following that all the way through May 2022.
How did you decide on the states that you ended up focusing on?
Yeah, I was thinking of doing it all over the country. And it just realized very quickly that that would be crazy. Would have taken forever, and I'd still be doing it. And so I kind of chose the parameters of just focusing on the events that happened in 2015 and 2016, and then looking at Texas and California, which had the most incidences because of the population of the states, and New Mexico and Oklahoma, which statistically year on year seem to have the most per capita incidents of these.
And I mean, to give people a sense of perspective, during the 2 years, the 2015 and 2016, am I getting this right? That there were a total of 2,239
Yes,
deaths.
combined in those 2 years, yes.
Yeah, during that period of time. So to try and follow that course of bloodshed would have been horrifying and impossible.
Yeah, definitely. And then I wanted again in this work to have quite a bit of white space, which is why you're seeing a 2-page spread that's up here. And I included the name and where the incident happened, but then I didn't want to just include the year of death. I wanted to include the year the person was born as well, just to kind of get that sense of a life, not just a death.
Right. No, and that in fact is the way that the book is organized.
Yeah, it's organized by, and that was actually the publisher's idea, which was brilliant. I had, I was kind of looking at it in terms of the flow of the photographs and how one would lead into the next. And he said, no, I think we should do this by the age of the victims. And it's really, it was a brilliant idea because it all of a sudden started to make sense.
Right. So the book, the picture sequence starts with someone who was 14 years old
Yeah.
and
And ends with
ends with,
somebody who's 77.
right.
And
So I
this
mean
is very
the thing I
different.
wanted to sorry, the thing I wanted to just emphasize is the very straightforward or rather consistent nature in which the visual narrative unfolds. Very, left hand text, right hand image, left hand text, right hand image.
I don't know why that's there like that. Um,
It's you did some hand coloring.
no, that I don't know why that's there. It's not like that in the book, obviously.
Um,
The images in this book are very different in the sense that in my earlier work, I would only photograph at a certain time of day, at least the black and white works. I wanted these really long exposures to get the emotional impact of what had happened. In this work, I was driving such distances, and there's so many that I couldn't. I had to work all day long and then travel and go from one to the next. So I had to photograph at all times of day. So there's not that emotional kind of artistic impact of the images. And I think we were speaking about this earlier, George, where this banality comes through with the images because they're just very straightforward. They're not in any way kind of quote artistic in that way. And I think there's something that works with that because it emphasizes the banality of these events where can happen anywhere. It just can be absolutely anywhere.
right. Well, and you made an interesting observation in the book in one of your texts in My America about the ground and the ground not seeming to remember the events that had taken place on it.
Yeah. Do you want me to read that or
Sure, if you do you have that available?
um yes. I know you had marked it. I was
Oh,
just listening to you. Let's
well,
see.
I can read it. I have it right here. Contrary to what I thought before embarking on the project, the ground did not seem to remember, and neither did we. And I think that referred to the fact that there were only 7 monuments that you found on over 300 sites that you visited.
Yeah, and this is one of them actually. It's
Mhm.
interesting that this came up just as we were speaking about this.
It was totally intentional, Diana, totally intentional.
Very good, George. No, but it's true, of all these over 300 places, there was only seven of them had any indication that something had happened there, that someone had died there. Some referred to that the involvement of the police, but most of them did not.
Mhm.
So
Um, well, when one of the things I find interesting about the photography in the project was that oftentimes what you had was an address, a street address, but you never, it seemed like you never tried to exactly pinpoint the place where the death occurred.
no, I wasn't doing kind of like Ouija or something. I wasn't if it happened inside, I wasn't going into the place. I was interested really in the not the literal 6 feet where it happened, but the address of where it was, the place, so you can get an idea of what the place looks like where this happened. Because as much as I was interested in what happened, I was also interested in kind of what this says about America visually and what do these places look like. I wasn't interested in the details of what did the bed look like or what did the grass look like where they passed away, but literally the I wanted more information to come through, I guess.
You spoke about this in an interview with Devora Baum,
Mhm.
saying that the photographs offer, quote, feeling as a way of seeing, so that you had to trust your gut as much as your eyes in a lot of situations.
Gosh, that was years ago. That was a while ago. I have no idea what I was referring to, and I'm so sorry, but
Well,
no,
feeling
I
as a way
think
of
that's
seeing, I
how
like
I
that.
I think that's how I work. I do a lot of research early on.
Mhm.
Obviously for this, it was very specific research about what happened, how it happened, and where it happened. But then when I'm on the road and I'm photographing, I really try to forget all that. And when I arrive to a place, I would usually have to watch some videos of what happened just to know kind of where I'm looking at, what because usually in the videos they'd have you'd see where this happened. And so I would be reminded each time of why I was there, this horrific act of violence. And that kind of primes your soul to feel and think a certain way when you're photographing, and you do I'm not just taking a picture of a landscape, although I think the landscape can speak to us. I'm really internally aware of what happened there and why, and I think that has to permeate what we do.
I think it's a startling realization to to think about this project and the fact that you took 6 trips thereabouts, 6 multi-hundred-mile trips,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that along the way you were staying in motels and very mundane spaces and eating breakfast in the breakfast rooms and smelling waffles and you know looking at television screens that were welcoming all the visitors to to a kind of similar morning ritual. And so there's a kind of coherence, even an equivalency between what you have been photographing and what you experienced on the way.
Yeah, and I had one very lovely interlude in there in which I was staying on the couch of Sarah, who's joining us today in
Ah,
Los Angeles, who so kindly let me sleep with on her sofa. And that was a having something like that is really special because you're I was very alone on this work. And I think something happens when you're out, or something happens to me when I'm out on the road, and you kind of open up your senses to another sense that you can't have in day-to-day life because you would be overwhelmed, but you're opening up so you can be aware of so much. And that awareness is also very lonely. So I had there were about 3 or 4 times where I was able to stay with friends or family, and one was with Sarah, and very enriching and very good for the soul when you're in that state of being.
mhm. Very, very hard to make those journeys. And there's such a history in American photography of the road trip and encountering the landscape. Um, one as I've been working on the project with you, I have this really surprising image that comes out of Robert Adams or Emmett Gowan using an iPhone. Is there any accuracy to that?
Of them using an iPhone, or
No,
of
no, of you
yes.
becoming the kind of Robert Adams or Emmett Gowan with an iPhone.
Well, I don't know. Oh gosh, I can't be compared to them. That's such an honor. But I did use an iPhone for this work. I'd never used one before to work, but it worked. It worked really well for this. One, it was one of the ways that we learned about all these incidences through the films that happened. But also just the cost of doing a project of such extent and such I always used a Hasselblad, so the doing this digitally, and I started just by using the iPhone to really to categorize what I was doing so I could remember when I got back, okay, this was for this person, and I just to make an archive. And I just really liked what I saw and didn't think that the photographs would be that big, so why not use it?
How do
In terms of,
you mean
and
big?
sorry.
How do you mean big?
make big photographs of this because I knew that I would be exhibiting lots of photographs. So they weren't going to be very big. I knew they probably, they're going to be, maximum this size. So I didn't have to worry about that when I was making them. But in terms of Emmett Gowan and Robert Adams, I had done a lot of reading of Robert Adams over the years. I love his writing. And didn't know much of his photography, nor Emmett Gowan's until around that time, 2015, 2016, when I was starting to, people would, or 2016, I guess, someone would look at the work and say, oh, have you, looked at their work, and becoming very familiar with the new topographics and seeing this, what is in the landscape, what has been caught in the landscape by photographers, and a sense of, I would almost say, a consideration of justice.
Mm.
What can the landscape tell us? And I think that's what those two particular have done so well over decades and decades and decades. This fidelity to the land, the fidelity to the idea of what are we doing to the land and what happens on the land and what can the land tell us.
What's
And
the beautiful quote about having a soft place to land?
yes, Emmett Gowan, and I quote that in the essay that I write, he says, the thing about a landscape photograph is that it gives the heart a place to stand. And I can't think of anything better than that. It's really true. And um, yeah, it's a very, um, he has a beautiful way with words, Emmett Gowan. He
Mm.
as much as his photographs, his words are absolutely,
You have a Robert Adams quote that you carry with you also.
yes, I did. I use that in the first essay that I write in there about the light, and he writes on the first page of his seminal book on photography, Why People Photograph. He says, there is still time in the lee, in the quiet, in the extraordinary light. And I did have that with me a lot because I kept thinking about that and feeling when I was making this work the opposite of that. And I
Mm.
wanted to feel that. There were so many times where I just thought, I just want to be on the road photographing. That's all I want to do. But I had these maps and I was going and I had this plan of photographing at these sites where people had been died in encounters with police. And it was that battle between the desire of just wanting to be in the light and focus on that in the landscape, but also like there wouldn't be enough time. And the I would be in a place and leave, and there's one city I was in Oklahoma, and the day I left, someone was killed again that day, the day I left. And so I always felt there was no way to catch up, that the continuation of these events, you could just never catch it. Do
Sarah,
justice.
it's so nice to have you here. Sarah, I was just noticing that you dropped a message in the chat about evidence, and Hisham's memoir. Do you want to say a little bit about about the memoir and your feeling about evidence? I'm gonna unmute. There you go.
Only evidence. I met Diana at PhotoFest, I think, when evidence had just come out. It's when we became friends. I just, it's so I always cite it and share it as a, powerful memoir and poetic use of, photography, and very concise and devastating use of words, I think, to tell that story. It's super powerful. And I mean, Hisham's memoir won the Pulitzer Prize. It's like it's the story of his disappeared father. Together, those two, I've met. I don't know Hisham well, but I've met him and really, really enjoy him. And I just think together, those two, it's an amazing. There are very few people in the world, who've gone through this experience of losing, a loved one, but then to be able to document it, you know,
Mhm. And Hisham is, just for clarification, Diana's husband.
yes,
Yeah,
Hisham Matar, yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
A book called The Return about going back to Libya in 2017. He wrote that, and about going back and trying to find information about his father. But it's about so much more than that.
Um, did you want to talk a little bit, Diana, about the title of the book and about My America? It seems like such a loaded title. Like there's
Yeah,
so many ways that you could take that. I mean, and even all the way back to looking at books by Walker Evans and Robert Frank and talking about the Americans and American photographs and how America gets used in great photography book titles, and your use of it with the possessive "My America" is
yeah.
just so loaded. Wonder if you wanted to talk about that a little.
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about using this title, actually, to be honest. But I felt very strongly about it because when we think about the kind of possessive, or when we think about, say, collective memory in the arts and humanities, we're all often thinking about collective trauma, but there's also that idea of collective responsibility. And that's what I'm really referring to here. And it was a mix of that and this sense of having been away and coming back and working both as a kind of insider and outsider in the country. Um, I've been coming back for quite a few years now, teaching part of the year, but I'd been away quite a while. And that sense of anything that happens in a country, you feel part of. And I think, and I write about this in the book, that I've made all these, I made all this work all over the world, both the work in Libya that was in evidence, but also in the Ukraine and other places, about sites of violence that is somehow connected with the state. And yet there's no place that what people do to each other and for each other, where it means more to me than my country, than America. So the title's working on a lot of different levels. And that's why I used the possessive there.
I have thought a lot about of, of something that I would call civic documentary or civil documentary.
Great idea that.
That you have a flag bearing position in that genre. When I think about work that truly is informed and motivated by a sense of the citizen and civilization, as much as any other incentive or impetus.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot about that in these days, as the country seems so polarized, and um that duty, and I feel my duty as a citizen is to be open, to be porous, to allow whatever is happening into me in a way that I then address through my work. There are many different ways that we are citizens and that we attend to things in our particular environment. And this is just one way. This is my way of doing that.
Mhm.
And I think for me, one of the things, and this goes to that idea of what did you say, civic,
Civic documentary.
such a great idea, George. But one of the things that was really important to me in this work was that it wasn't just a polemic, that it was really important. There's a lot of text that we didn't go in when we were going through it, but there's a whole middle section of the book that has a lot of statistics in it, and then the whole end of the book has, for each one of those photographs and people, there's a text about what happened and then what happened in the courts, and were there any ramifications later on, and then
That's
are the names of the 2,000 plus people that died across the whole country over those 2 years that I was looking at. So, but I didn't want this to be a place that was um, just one side battling against the other. I wanted it to be a quiet place where we could look at it and say, let's take some responsibility and figure this out. How can this work? And you can't do that when there's a lot of fighting, I think. And that's what I was trying to get at. I'm
You
not,
did, we were talking earlier, the rather wonderful and surprising and challenging thing you did at the very beginning of My America, which was to include the transcript of a police incident.
yeah.
And your rationale behind that was in part because the police were working very hard to not escalate the situation.
Yeah, and I wanted that one in the book because it does show something that I did see quite a lot. Not always, often the police were very aggressive, or you get the whole gamut of what happens when you're working on a project this big. And one of the things that shows you is that, you know, these issues are really complex. And the more we can understand, the better we can address them instead of escalating into fighting. But that particular transcript, it does show how the police were responding to an issue of a mental health issue, someone that was armed and couldn't get their medication because the Medicaid turned off or something. It had all these levels of social breakdown in it, and the police are trying to respond to this situation and trying to de-escalate it, and then it ends up with the victim being shot by the police, and so you just see how difficult this is, and how it can be very difficult, and I wanted that in there. I wanted to show that this isn't all just one way or the other.
Um, I see a lot of familiar faces, friends, photographers who are in the group. Would love to open it up to questions that you might have for Diana about the books or about this project in particular. Um, Anyone care to venture forward? You can take yourself off mute and
I can. Peter here.
Hi, Pete.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed looking at your book, and I think it was nice to hear a little bit about your experience taking the photographs, because the immediate impression I had when looking at them is they have sort of a reserved appearance, but I could imagine it being a really contemplated sort of emotional act to actually take these photographs. And then that reverence comes across with this, just the sheer volume of images, page after page. But so I didn't know if there was anything more that you had to say about just the experience of being in that place and taking the photograph. It seemed more than just doing the art.
Yeah, I mean it it has to be when the numbers, just you're doing one after the other, you just, I mean, there's so many times that I would just be standing there and thinking, my God, somebody just somebody died here, and they died in a kind of extrajudicial manner. They died through the hands of the very people that we think of are there to protect. And not all of the cases, of course, there were some pretty, criminal acts that were going, but many of them were just could have been handled so in such a different way. So yeah, I felt a kind of artistic responsibility to the person that had passed, particularly to the families, having been part of a family, somebody who had been affected by some type of violence or death that's connected to the state, although a very different kind of thing. I still understood that. So yeah, it was very emotional. I don't know much else to say, but I yeah, it was a kind of devotion to something, I guess would be the best way I could put that.
And an exhausting, I mean, in a
Was.
pilgrimage of sorts too.
Yeah. Um, to really the photography was less exhausting, actually.
Mhm.
I think you and I were talking about this the other day, George, that there was something about being out on the road and in many small towns and in rural areas, and just seeing the beauty of the country, the absolute beauty of I mean, I'm from the West Coast originally, so I love that part of the world, but um yeah, it's just a majestic place and so diverse. But it was when I started doing all the research after the photography was done, that's where the stamina came in, and that was really hard, I have to say. And I was each of those little things in the book that are kind of, some are very small because there's not much information released, but others are quite long. I was writing those pretty much, going over each of them once a week for several years because the information was changing that fast. So they just became kind of embedded in my brain in a
The publisher,
very difficult way.
GOST, the publisher, hired a proofreader, or not a, no, a fact checker, right?
Fact checker, yeah. We had to have a fact checker. And then we found like really interesting thing happened like many times. Like we had some delays with things, and so had to go back and fact check again. And for example, like web pages that were part of the FBI were just gone. They just completely disappeared. So we would have to go into that. I forget what the name of it is, but it's this thing that shows every web page that's ever been published.
The
That kind
Wayback
of
Machine.
machine, but sorry.
The Wayback Machine.
Yes, the Wayback Machine to find the information, and so the information was changing all the time. The access to things was changing. The myself and all the editors, we had all these subscriptions to these tiny little newspapers all over the country for, a long time. So yeah, it was a, and I tell my students now, be careful what you start because you may be dealing with it for many years, and
Mm.
you want to be living in something that you want to be really in for a long time.
Your admiration of Emmett Gowan and Robert Adams plays into your curriculum for your class. I think it's quite a wonderful class that you're teaching.
Yeah, I'm teaching this semester something called photographing the Anthropocene, and we're looking at kind of for half the semester we look at these long form photography, mainly books, the made by photographers that are addressing the kind of beauty and bounty of nature over many years. And then the last half is works by photographers who are looking at where the state of the world, the state of the environment,
Mhm.
during this time we're living in. So it's a very interesting class. Yeah.
Do you feel that the students gravitate towards any particular photographers? Are there people who are just,
Yeah, they always love the one that you're showing that week.
oh,
Amazing. You think, oh, this is so amazing. And then the next week oh, this is so amazing. And the photographers who are I kind of define nature in a very wide way, including the cosmos. And so we're looking at things like Kawada's The Last Cosmology, or Amikawa's Mariposas Nocturnas, looking at a lot of Susan Durgis's work on water. And then we get in and The Ravens by Fukushima. And then later on we get into some of the really work looking at plastic inside of birds and in the ocean, and Mandy Barker's work, and we look at Pillar by Gill, what's his name?
yeah, Stephen Gill.
Even Gill, yeah. So kind of looking at, well, photographers that are looking at nature, but then others that are kind of using nature as a view onto something else, and others who are trying to take the point of nature, such as Gill's work with these trying to get the animals to make the images themselves. So it's an interesting course.
Mhm.
Yeah. And is everyone on here photographers? Is that an interest, or interested in photo books or making photo books, or what are all your?
They better be.
I don't have there's no names up on the thing, so I only see faces.
Oh, really? Robert, introduce yourself. I'm calling you out.
Are you talking to me?
I am. I'm talking to you.
Okay, I'm Robert Kalman. I'm a documentary portrait photographer, and the title of my upcoming book also has America in it. My book is a series of portraits across, as yours is, across the country, stopping just everyday people in the street with an having an 8x10 and asking them, what's it like for you to be an American? And having them stand for the portrait, but also handwrite their answer. Everybody having the same amount of space to write the answer, and everybody in the upcoming book scaled exactly the same to sort of democratize these portraits of our fellow citizens. And I tried I think successfully, to be quite neutral. And I took a journalist's kind of attitude where I did not want to in any way bias the people I was working with or show my own biases. In this book, I present people as Americans. I love the anecdote that is my favorite from spending 4 years on the road was in Oregon, the eastern part of Oregon, which is very red. And so my wife is my assistant, and when I see someone I'd like to photograph, I let her break the ice, simply because it's just easier for strangers to, since we want something, encounter a woman first rather than me. So I saw this woman in a bright red Nebraska t-shirt, older woman, in her my age. So I could see from the conversation that they were going to come over. And the woman arrives, introduces herself. I introduce myself, and I said, did Linda explain everything to you? She said, oh, yes. I said, so we're ready to, she says, just a minute. And she gave me this, I just can see it as I'm talking about. She moved her head back and she looked me up and down. And she said, I have a question. You're not a Democrat, are you?
Oh no. Oh my God.
And I didn't bat an eyelash. I looked right at her and I said, ma'am, what I am is an American, just like you.
Great. This is a really important book. That's great.
Yes,
When is it coming out?
it will, I think it will be ready in this summer. My intention was to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence with this book. So it's out a year ahead of time, which is good because then I can shop it around.
Who's publishing it? Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And the title of the book,
Oh, yeah. So the question I asked everybody is, what's it like for you to be an American? And that's the title of the book. And, my hallucination is that when people read it, they'll sort of be self-reflective and think about it for themselves.
Yeah.
What's it like? Frequently when I would ask people, I mean, ultimately we encountered 492 Americans. 76 of them have been edited into the book. So we couldn't include everybody, and I had to come up with a decent number that would fit in 128 pages. Because
very important right now, that book.
thank you.
Robert's work fits into the civic documentary project as well.
Confederate monuments was my favorite.
Was it really? Of all your projects?
I'm being sarcastic, but yes. Many of the photographs I made of the Confederate monuments, the monuments are gone. So I feel like I have the market, when they need an archive of a picture of a certain monument, I have it.
Chuck Avery is sitting there trying to hide behind Cindy Lawson's name. Chuck, I know you've been working on a labor history project and looking at sites of labor history violence.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I've for several years now been traveling around the country just like you, Diana, and I've mapped out the spots around the country where just important events in labor history occurred, starting with, right around 1824 at the mills in on the East Coast in Massachusetts, up to, I think the latest photograph I've taken was at the site where Karen Silkwood was run off the road and killed. But I'm kind of taking an approach very similar, where I'm looking at the landscapes where these events have happened, and I'm just really interested in how the past and the present come together at these spots. What is the landscape telling us? Is it telling us anything? Can we pull the history? Can we understand that history in this spot? And
how have you answered that question for yourself? Because I thought I had answered that question for myself, and then this particular project really challenged that. But I still think that even if you're photographing, or we're photographing at a site and it doesn't tell us that there's still a real validity to photograph there.
oh yes.
It really matters.
And what I'm shooting is more, embedded into the history books, although it's not, labor history is not taught in this country. But so I'm finding, every once in a while you'll find a little historical marker tucked away somewhere, that might talk about the event. But most often, it's just silence by, any public commemoration
Right.
of some very horrific events.
Yeah.
happened.
Are you photographing at all in California? Like where Cesar Chavez and that in the
Yeah, I've been down to Delano and
yeah,
just up the road from there in Pixley, where there
yeah.
was a strike in the 20s. I've been around the country, probably, I'm figuring I've got at least 15,000 miles on my Honda right now, doing that. And it's interesting to hear you talk about the journey, the road, where you're working on these kind of things and you're spending hours, you know, in the car, you arrive at your destination, and then you step out of the car and you have to transform and enter that other world. And your brain, you just have to undergo this transformation to be able to really, like you say, delve into what you are looking at and to understand your space. And for me, that's kind of the nub of my project, is understanding these spaces, looking at them,
Yeah.
and feeling that history there. And so often I am standing in these spaces knowing the particulars of whatever event that is. And sometimes you just, it enters you, you feel that it's really kind of spooky, and it's uncanny, but it's very real. So
I agree. I think there's um a state of being that happens because we're not just talking about going place to place, we're talking about time. Trying that aspect of being aware of something that didn't just happen there then, but happened many years before. And what are all the other things that happened on this space? And can you be open enough to kind of gather those within and do something with them? It's a very unique way of working.
yeah. And for me, a lot of times it's just that, you're driving for hours, and, the exhaustion and the toll it takes on you mentally and physically,
Yeah.
and just trying to be in that moment when you arrive. I've sometimes I've gone to a place and just, I've got to come back tomorrow, find a
Yeah.
hotel, because you're not ready. So that was a question I was going to ask you about.
Also, I think, I don't know about you, but for me, I got the more I did it, the better I became, but also the more I liked that state of being. And there's this film that I saw not long after I had finished doing the photographs of these things, and it was about a sailor. In Britain, they have this sailing race that's around the world, a solo sailing race that goes around the world, and it starts, I think, in Portsmouth, or I can't remember where. And people from all over the world start there and they go around and they come back. And there was this guy, this French gentleman was winning, and he was back and he had a family, and he was talking through the whole film how much he missed his family and how he wanted to be there. But then as soon as he got within the spot where he could see the port, he just turned around and he went back out because he was so used to being alone.
Yeah.
And sometimes I felt that sense of, you get so used to that state of being on your own, being very open to something that can go through the camera, that you have to shut down afterwards. You can't keep it in your normal day-to-day life. But there's something very, I don't know, very alluring to that too. As hard as it is and as exhausting as it is, there's something also very special about it, or unique, I guess is a better word.
Absolutely.
It's essentially American. It's, you know, going, striking out to the West and finding your place in the world,
Mm,
looking to the frontier.
yeah, yeah,
I have a question.
yeah.
Hi, this is Deborah.
I
Um,
did.
hello, I enjoyed your work and this conversation very much. My process with the work was, it grew on me. And I started at first going, okay, what have we here? Not being at all familiar with your work. And, and then I went, oh, wow. And then I read this, and then I looked some more, and then I read this and looked some more. And it's really stuck with me. And I thought the photos themselves, I'm surprised to hear that you did them on an iPhone and that you did them with a sense of urgency at any time of day or whatever time you got there, and didn't have the chance to do what you might have done, because I thought they were beautifully composed and told stories within themselves. What struck me now in your comments was the feeling that it just keeps happening. Like you said, when you left, I think it was Tulsa that day, someone else had been murdered, and the sense that you just could not keep up.
Yeah.
How, I don't know if the book touches on that. I don't have the book. I'm sorry to say, I don't know if it touches on that or if one gets the feeling that one just can't keep up. I mean, it's overwhelming in your presentation,
Yeah.
which is a good thing, because I want to be overwhelmed by it, but even more overwhelming to hear you say, we can't keep up with this.
Yeah, well, it's a tome. It is a huge book. I mean, it's
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's a big book. So I think it's just that one after the other, after the other, after the other. And you know, we could have made a book this big, and we decided, the publisher and I, it's like, you know, at some point, just over 100 to 200 or 300 is not going to make a difference. You just get that sense.
Mm.
That,
Right.
oh my God.
The book is 300 pages long.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
It-
yeah.
it does, yeah, I don't know, maybe George, you have a better answer to this. I don't know.
Well,
It's
just
hard
in
for
seeing
me.
it,
Sorry?
just in seeing it, just you showing me that answered my question. That it's this big and it's this period of time,
Yeah,
what the future
yeah.
holds.
And I write in the essay that even with all these really good things that have had come in the last few years in terms of more training and stuff, still the same number of people are pretty much being killed each year. So it is a
Stubborn.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's interesting, like when I think about this work now and this idea of you have of civic documentary, and I think anyone working on issues of justice right now, it's really pertinent, because we're just living in a time where we're seeing injustice. You know, we're seeing it on a daily basis, and very little is being done for whatever reason. So it's, you know, when I was working on this, it was kind of all I could see. It was all I was thinking. But now I'm very, yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to go into all that. But I'm very when you think about this on then a much larger scale, you just kind of shake your head.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
The dance we have to do every day with the hellstorm that's raining down on us.
Yeah,
And
Diana,
thank
thank you.
Mhm.
it's my
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for being here. I'm
you,
gonna just
George,
plug
and thank all of you.
next month's presentation is Will Harris's You Can Call Me Nana. This is a book from a couple of years ago, from 2021. So if you want to try and find this, it's a little bit harder to locate So I'm giving you a heads up now to scour used bookstores to find it. Again, it's called You Can Call Me Nana by Will Harris from Overlaps Press. All right. Thank you, everyone. Diana, thank you again so much.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
George. Really
you.
nice meeting you all.
Talk to you.
Take care, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good luck with your projects, Chuck and Robert.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.